All right, I'd like to welcome you all to this spring's Zim Turn Organized chat live from the Zimmerman Edelson Studios here in Great Neck, New York. Today we're going to be talking with journalists who are going to comment on the changes on the media landscape and how these media changes are impacting the way that we as future journalists and PR professionals are doing our jobs on a daily basis. And so I want to let all of you know who are out there. Many of you in the audience are journalism and public relations students, and we're hoping that today we'll be able to give you a sense of how these changes in the digital landscape are affecting you. And we're very, very lucky to have three awesome panelists who are here to talk to you today. I'd like to first introduce Delia Panescu, and Delia is currently the social media coordinator for the New York Post, and she's written, edited, and reported for multiple publications, including Muck Rack, New York Magazine, and Food Network. And make sure that throughout this chat that you're checking her out on Twitter at Delia_P, and you can tweet any extra questions you have at her and kind of see what she's up to after the chat tonight. But thank you so much for being here, Delia.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure.
And Max Knobloch. Hey, Max.
Hey.
Max is a water cooler reporter for Mashable in their New York City offices. He's a journalist, humor writer, and illustrator whose work has also been featured in Thought Catalog and the Pacific Standard. More humor and art by Max can be found on his Tumblr, but you might want to follow him on Twitter at Max Knobloch. And I've been lucky enough to see some of those really fun illustrations, and so I recommend that everybody checks those out. And also, we are joined by Travell Anderson. Hey, Travell, thanks so much for being here. Travell is a reporter with the Los Angeles Times, previously worked for Logo TV's LGBT news blog, New Now Next, the Peninsula Press, and Atlanta Magazine, among other publications. Travell has received his master's in journalism from Stanford University and a degree in sociology from Morehouse College in Atlanta. You should also make sure to follow Travell at Travell Anderson. And Travell, I'm also a sociology graduate from Hofstra, so I'll feel you on that. And I should probably introduce myself. I forgot to do that, even though you have the lower third there. Marc Oppenheim, and I'll be your moderator tonight. I'm an associate dean for student affairs at the Lawrence Herbert School of Communication at Hofstra University, and looking forward to talking about journalism and PR in this ever-changing digital media landscape. And so I think one of the things that I would want to start off with is just, and maybe we'll start with Travell, asking you just any things that you've noticed even during your time as a journalist in the last few years, how changes on the digital side and kind of the real shift toward a digital distribution for a lot of publications and a lot of content areas. How has the digital shift been something that you've noticed a big change in kind of how journalists do their daily jobs?
Well, I think it's basically more so, I think we as journalists, we've always wanted to be first, and we've always wanted to be the most accurate. Now I think that idea of being first, it's a little more pertinent. With everybody having a website and everybody having a blog and everybody having Twitter, you still very much want to be first. You want to have the most interesting story. You want to get the most clicks and things like that. And so I think it's just kind of heightened what we've always done in journalism in terms of wanting to be first.
Max, if I could ask you, about that, and kind of being at Mashable, which is really a hub for popular culture and really a great place for us to get a lot of very cool and interesting information and read a lot of diverse stories, how you're seeing the evolution. And again, I know you've been with Mashable for a short while, but you've probably already seen some changes in terms of things that are going on now and maybe things that might be moving toward the future.
Yeah. Well, I've been at Mashable for 2 years. About 10 months of that was an internship. And definitely, I agree with everything that was just said, but in terms of like getting to things first, I think the immediacy of the internet allows us to also take new angles that are a little bit different than a traditional publication would do. So if we're reporting on something that doesn't have such a depth or seriousness to it, we can be funny or we can be weird or snarky or sarcastic, and that's all allowed because we're able to see, one, what our competitors are doing immediately, and also just kind of get ideas from just how people communicate online. We definitely use a more conversational tone with things like that. And then as I've been at Mashable, we are using more reporting methods every day. Twitter's always been, one you need to be on Twitter, but also lately we're really big into Periscope and Meerkat live streaming different events. A coworker of mine is actually down in Baltimore right now, and he's periscoping protests and things like that. So yeah, it's always changing. Every day is something new.
Now, Max, I wanted to ask you about your title, Water Cooler Reporter, and kind of what the genesis of that is. And is that something that I'm guessing is more of a recent kind of title and kind of where that's evolved from?
Well, I report exclusively on water coolers. No, Water Cooler is our channel. I guess every website kind of has a channel like it. Some call it LOL, or some call it, it's our web culture channel on Mashable, and we call it Water Cooler, I guess, because it's like we see it as what you kind of talk about at work, or like it's what people are talking about. So that's our web culture viral section, and we cover pretty much anything.
Very cool. Delia, I'm going to also ask for your sense of things, and I know that coming from a traditional print journalism background and now being immersed in the digital and working as the social media coordinator for New York Post, I'm very curious to kind of get your viewpoint on kind of how things are evolving and how you've seen change over the last 5 to 10 years.
So I feel really lucky because I think I got into journalism right when social media was starting, which to me is really excellent because I have a print journalism degree, which even at the time seemed mostly irrelevant, and everyone was telling me so. But I was really, really convinced that writing wasn't going to change and people reading news wasn't going to change. Just the way that it happened has changed, and really pretty drastically. But because I just have always really believed in good quality reporting and people getting the right information, as far as I'm concerned, it can come from anywhere. So working with the Post has been really excellent because we are the nation's oldest newspaper. It was founded in 1801, which is really unbelievable. But I mean, there are so many amazing, talented reporters here who know how to get the story, and I just help them get that information out in the best way possible. So obviously, I mean, most of our audience is on Facebook and Twitter, but obviously we're always trying new platforms, doing bigger pushes on Instagram and Pinterest. We're also exploring with Periscope, though not as much as Mashable. But yeah, I mean, I think it's exciting. I think it's great. I think the really fun part about it is that it is always changing and something's always new. So you kind of get to try a whole bunch of different things, but ultimately good news, good information will always rise to the top.
Yes, excellent, and it's really interesting to get that perspective. coming from the print journalism into the digital. And I wanted to actually go back to Travell. I think you mentioned a couple of minutes ago kind of the element of immediacy in terms of the digital and social. And I'm curious, kind of with such immediate access to content and how people are trying to get the story out quicker, how does that impact you as a journalist in terms of the expectations of your editors and deadlines and getting your stories out? Do you find that because people have such immediate access to content, there's a push to you to make it come faster?
I think there's definitely that feeling and that idea out there, but I think the one thing that trumps immediacy is accuracy. So if for some reason you getting it out in 10 minutes, you're going to mess something up, you need to take the extra 5 minutes and make sure that no one likes to do a correction. Especially if it happens to go into the newspaper, then you have to run a print correction. That doesn't look good for anybody. Nobody wants that. So I think accuracy is the one thing that trumps immediacy. So it's always kind of a balancing act. How much do you wait in order to make sure you have a full enough story that you can go forward with and feel comfortable with people reading and understanding and things like that?
Max, I wanted to ask you, in terms of the stories that you're writing, are you finding that your relationship to PR professionals is changing, and again that in terms of trying to get the information out, of course accurately but quickly, do you have different relationships with anyone on the PR side in terms of trying to connect the dots between information that's coming toward you and stuff that you want to send out to the public?
Yeah, I mean, I have relationships with the PR teams of a lot of different companies, different online companies, and so they'll send us, exclusives or information about an update to their app or an update to their website or a new feature that's being launched. But in terms of PR that is not from a company, that's kind of hired by a celebrity or something like that, we're dealing with them all the time. And I guess the main thing isn't how we interact, but what the story is. Because if it's a good story or if it's something that will resonate with our readers, then we'll always go with it. At the same time, we're not always doing news, so we write a lot of entertainment content. I was just writing some scripts for Bill Nye, who came into Mashable to. He's been doing videos with us, so it's working with them. It's figuring out what exactly they want, what exactly kind of thing Bill Nye is into doing. Yeah, so it's a varied relationship with each one, but it's always about the story, or it's always about what will work for our audience.
Now, one thing that I was curious about that I mentioned to Delia a couple minutes ago before we came on was just kind of getting a sense of where the position of social media coordinator fits in at a newspaper, to get a sense of kind of your responsibilities, and are those ever changing as every day we have new things like Periscope and Meerkat, and kind of how do you find kind of the evolution of your position, and how do you really know what audience you're speaking to when the digital audience on the other side is growing and growing and could be just about anyone nowadays?
Yes, all good questions. Let's start with how a social media editor coordinator fits in at a newspaper. It is completely different for every single publication. I was just talking to a grad student at CUNY Journalism who is doing a project where she wants to shadow various social media editors for various newspapers to see where the overlap and the differences are. So definitely it's such a vastly different position across all the publications, because everyone is kind of finding they have different needs. So whereas one person may be more involved with strategy overall and liaising between ad sales and how to make that work for their department, another person might be very much like in the newsroom involved with how do we get our reporting out on social, or how do we use social to inform our reporting. On my end, I do much more of the latter, but because we have so many different departments, what they need and how that ends up working out also changes. So obviously the Post has several other secondary Twitter accounts. Our fashion department has their own Twitter and Instagram. Sports has their own Twitter but no Instagram. We have a separate Metro Twitter account. So it's a lot of like figuring out, what is happening with this department and how can social best serve them. And it's always changing. I mean, we also run social for our Page 6 team, but the Page 6 reporters and web producers are very involved in that social, whereas other teams, reporters might not be as involved in like the actual output of social. So it's definitely very, very different, but it's a very involved job. You have to like absolutely just love journalism, love your publication, and fortunately I really do. I think it's great here. I mean, it's the Post, so everyone knows about it. The brand awareness factor is really, really high, which helps a lot on social. I mean, there are a lot of publications that are trying to make a name for themselves, and we're at least lucky enough that the Post already has such a name. So anywhere we go on social, anything we kind of choose to do, everyone is kind enough to follow us there because just the personality of the paper itself is fun and exciting. And okay, yeah. So the third part of your question.
Sorry about that. There was a lot in there.
About the different, I guess, platforms that come up.
Yeah.
I mean, we're a team of 3 people who run social here at the Post, and we're kind of always talking about it. We actually don't get to meet that much, just to sort of sit and chat because there is so much to do. But when we do, we're kind of always, thinking, for example, Periscope came out. How does it actually work? How are we, what are the buttons? Where is everything? Because then inevitably there will be reporters who come to us and say, hey, what is Periscope? How does it work? So you kind of become the social ambassador. And, then you kind of, I mean, there will always be people in a newsroom who are more interested in social than others, and there are some people who are more interested in like the emerging social. And you just kind of work with those people and see how their work can be helped with the newer platforms, if fashion wants to start doing new Pinterest boards, or if our video team wants to do more with Instagram, like we're always happy to help and have that conversation and figure out, what will be the easiest thing to do and what will like give us the best results, obviously. So lots of conversations with lots of different departments all day long.
Now, just to remind the panel and those of you watching, this particular panel was created by the Zimterns, the fabulous interns at Zimmerman Edelson, who are all kind of making their way toward careers in media and public relations and journalism. And so, when we think about them and we think about those of our audience members who are making the jump soon from being college students to being media professionals, I mean, is there any advice from any of you in terms of where's a good landing spot for a recent grad who kind of needs to figure out the landscape and kind of not get ahead of themselves? Do you have any advice on kind of the type of job, besides for the one that's hiring, but if they could choose, a good position that would give them well-rounded skills, where you would advise yourself if you were kind of entering the job field and going into journalism or PR, the kind of environment that you think is best to cultivate the future journalist? I don't know if one of you wants to jump in there with your thoughts.
Go ahead.
Okay. I would say somewhere, yeah, I mean, anywhere with a job. No, but you want to find somewhere that fits what you like to do. So Mashable is a place that has a ton of different areas of coverage, and they also, like I said, don't exclusively do news reporting. So I wanted somewhere where I could do both, where I could illustrate, where I could work on video, where I could write sometimes, funny things, and then also just generally report. So that's why I chose that. That's why I sought that out for an internship. But yeah, figure out exactly what it is that you want to do. Having a beat helps, obviously, for figuring out what the best place for you is. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Okay, Travell?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think in general, I'm a fan of casting your net wide in terms of the opportunities that you apply to. And then, if you I try to tell a lot of people, don't necessarily worry about a job if you can get an internship. Everybody that says an internship is like a foot in the door, but it really is, especially in this particular industry where I feel like, a lot of us younger people can be looked down upon because we don't necessarily have as much experience, or we don't, or we just have a different outlook when it comes to this particular industry. Internships and fellowships. I'm a part of a fellowship right now at the LA Times, and my fellowship allows me to rotate through different sections of the newspaper. And that really allows me to find out if I want to do hard news, if I want to be on the streets covering protests, or do I want to be, in an office interviewing celebrities, or whatever the case may be. And so those type of opportunities, we shouldn't necessarily just look at internships and fellowships as ways for the company to benefit off of us, but it's also a way for us to benefit from, trying out the company and testing out the company to see if it's a great fit for us.
Now, Max, you had, in talking about kind of going to Mashable as a good place to start your career, I want to talk about kind of emerging media and changes, and just looking at ways that your company is trying to, break out and expand and do new things. And so I wanted to ask you about the Mashable Velocity product that really is trying to be innovative in understanding what viral content is and how to kind of predict and encourage. And so I wanted to ask you to, talk to our audience about velocity, and kind of that may be something that journalists and PR pros are looking toward to kind of see how to reach audience. And I'm very curious from the inside to kind of get a sense of the excitement behind that product.
Yeah, so Velocity is a platform that was built by our product team, and basically it scours the web, runs on an algorithm that essentially figures out what is going viral, or what is about to go viral, and it also helps us to track which ones of our stories, how they're doing, and how they're sharing, and who's sharing them, and things like that. So it definitely is a tool that we use to find emerging stories that you might not find by just your daily scraping of Twitter and things like that. Yeah, it's something that we use to find viral stories and find stories that resonate with an audience, obviously.
If I could interject, Max, what would that mean for the PR professional specifically in terms of what you're referring to there?
Oh, like how would that change?
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, like, we typically don't find viral stories through PR professionals. So I'm not sure that it does really all that much alter my relationship with PR. I guess, yeah, I mean, we're still, I still have the same relationship with PR professionals. I don't, it rarely will scoop a story from them, you know what I mean? Because typically a PR professional is hired to send out stories that aren't already being reported. So Velocity scours the web for things that have already been reported, and allows us to see them from maybe a site like a local site. Maybe that's where I find a lot of weird news stories, weird and viral news. So that's things that I wouldn't find, if I'm just subscribed to like Dig, or I'm just looking at my TweetDeck or a Twitter list. I'm not going to be following, like KNYB in Memphis, which had a killer weird news story. But with Velocity, that helps me find that. So in terms of PR, yeah, I'm not sure that it alters all that greatly my relationship. Yeah, because it's still all about the story in the end. We skip plenty of stuff that we see on Velocity that wouldn't do well with our audience. It's definitely not just to do everything that does well. It's really just another tool, similar to a Twitter list, or similar to looking at websites that we would typically get other ideas from. It's another thing in our tool belt that we use to find stories.
Now, for Travell and Delia, in general, how is technology changing the way that you garner your sources and commentators and other people that you're speaking to be able to get the story right?
I mean, it just kind of helps you find people so much easier. I know lots of people have been talking about this, but Dan Victor, who used to do social at the New York Times and is now one of their, I think, homepage editors, news editors. I could be wrong about his exact title, but he wrote this great Medium piece earlier this week about what you should be using to find people on Twitter. And it was just this really smart thing of, like, if you're trying to find, like, somebody who is at an event or, like, a news happening, you should include the word me or my in the Twitter search, because it's much more organic to how people are actually tweeting as opposed to how a journalist is thinking about what it is that they want out of a tweet. And it was just a very, like, obvious, smart thing. And I think it's, sort of just one example of how easy it has become to report on stories and to find your sources. I mean, obviously, something like what Ozzy is doing, being at protests and being live on the scene is very important. But for every one reporter that you can afford to send out there, you have another team of 5 or 10 in the office that are building these stories and putting them together. And so, yes, you're getting live reporting from a reporter and you're getting photos from your photographer, but you can also get a much bigger perspective from everyone's Twitter tweets and Instagram photos and vines and even periscopes. You can really just, like, feed the story and make it that much better and more well-rounded.
I'd be remiss if I didn't reference Ozzy, who you just referenced to. Ozzy Paivara was supposed to also be part of our panel, and regretfully, business called and he had a story to cover, and so he wasn't able to join us, but he had set up a hashtag, Ask Ozzy, so that our viewers could send him questions. So you can still check out Ozzy. He's on Twitter at AZI, and the hashtag Ask Ozzy, for those of you who want to catch up with him. Ozzy's a reporter for Capital New York, and we're sorry he couldn't be here, but we know he's doing good work out in the field. Another thing that I think I'm curious to ask you guys is, with the many different platforms and sources and places that you can get your news as just consumers of news and information, where is it that each of you goes to get your news? Like, what do you check every morning before you get ready to go to work? Travell?
For me, the first thing is Twitter. I say Twitter and then Facebook, and then I subscribe to a couple newsletters from different sites, so like The Root or The Griot or something like that, or Ozzy.com. So yeah, but it's mainly Twitter and Facebook. Twitter first, and then I'll get to Facebook eventually.
How come? I mean, why those two? Is there a particular reason?
I think that for me, I'm the type of person where I like just short bits. Like, I like headlines, and if I want to go deeper on a particular topic, I can click on it. And so Twitter is just one of those spaces that allows me to kind of do a quick digest of what happened since I was sleeping. And then I can, pinpoint which things I want to look in deeper to, or things I just want to look over.
How about you, Max?
Yeah, like I had mentioned, I have built a various slew of Twitter lists, which I would encourage anyone who wants to be a journalist or a PR professional to. And so that's a slow burn thing, right? That's like as you find someone that you respect, and as you find someone who you think delivers trustworthy news on a regular basis, or seems to find good stories and tweet them, then you'll see them on that list. And that's, I look at those through TweetDeck, which is how I typically view Twitter. In terms of like waking up, yeah, I'm always on Twitter. I don't always use it for news, but also just various apps that are great right now. NYT Now is the New York Times mobile app. That's fantastic. Aside from posting New York Times articles, which obviously is they're always great, they have a Our Picks section, which lets you, they essentially curate fun or weird or important stories that they find around the internet. So I'm looking at that a lot. And then I have Feedly, which is just your typical old school like RSS feed, where I subscribe to almost every single website on the internet now. But you look through what your competitors are doing. You look through what everyone that you respect in the medium is doing. That's what everywhere.
Thank you, Ilya.
I mean, yeah, just to jump right on the bandwagon, I check Twitter pretty much all the time. I'm pretty convinced that of everyone I'm following right now, I would know about something happening as soon as it happens, as it pertains to like me and needing news. I also get some Twitter alerts sent directly to my phone from a couple of breaking news sites. So I like always know what's going on, which makes me feel more comfortable about my job and my life. And then I read the New York Times morning newsletter that they send. And actually, in the last couple of months, I've been reading BuzzFeed's morning newsletter, which is also great. And I was really pleasantly surprised to find that it's written by their news editors or a couple of reporters, but it's not just BuzzFeed links. It's kind of, here's what's happening in news from everywhere, which is great. And then I still very much love the Marc Daily, which I wrote for 2 years, but the wonderful journalist who took it over for me, Kirsten Browning, is still doing a great job. And Marc is amazing because they have this feature called the Newsroom, which you can just see on their site that you don't have to sign up for an account. And it's basically all of the stories that their pool of something like 20,000 journalists are tweeting about right now. And so when you open it up, it'll just be like the top 10 stories that all of journalism, on the internet is mentioning, which is just a really great way to know what will probably be bubbling up for the day or what has already, taken over Twitter and you should absolutely know about, which is great, and I'm still a huge, huge fan. But other than that, I mean, yeah, I'm pretty convinced that, between a couple of Twitter lists and everyone I'm following on Twitter, I'm a huge fan of just knowing what's going on. And then also, Facebook is great because I love seeing what everyone is sharing. Fortunately, I just am friends with a lot of other media people, so all of their news is great. But then kind of everyone that I've ever known around the world, people share lots of really interesting stuff, and sometimes it'll be things that you might not have normally figured out. Whatever random viral video is like really big in France right now, so it helps to kind of keep in touch with like non-media people too.
Now, this morning, the Pew Research Center for Journalism and Media published the State of the News Media for 2015, and I'm guessing that you guys probably saw that. And one of the things that Amy Mitchell wrote at the start was that at the start of 2015, 39 of the top 50 digital news websites have more traffic to their sites and associated applications coming from mobile devices than from desktops. And I think, Travell, you may have mentioned the term skimming, and kind of when people are using more mobile and kind of getting quicker, shorter hits on information, how does that change the way that you tell your stories and the way that you craft your articles? I guess.
Well, I think the general idea is to, as with journalism in general, is you want to grab the person's attention, you know, with some interesting lead or whatever the case may be. But I think it definitely becomes a challenge to develop like your own individual voice when it comes to your reporting, something that can be something that's going to make somebody want to stay on the page if they're on the desktop, or stay on the article if they're on their phone. So whether that's something that is, whether you know, there's a great reporter at the LA Times, Amy Kaufman. She does a lot of entertainment reporting. She has just this perfect way of injecting her own little sarcasm in all her articles that makes me want to read a 1,200-word article when normally after like 10 words I'm done. And so I think that's a challenge for those of us who have those creative abilities in the stuff that we write. We definitely want to do that. And then for the straight news reporters, it's for the most part, you know, it's the inverted pyramid that we've all been taught. You know, put all the juicy information that we want to know at the top. That way, if we don't get to the bottom, we know exactly what we need.
Max, do you find that you're impacted by the skimming audience?
Yeah, for sure. And you know, well, it's both. You know, it's not everybody's doing that, but a lot of people are, and sometimes you can win over the people that are, like, you know, like we just talked about. But I would say what I do is I like to we like to put in different forms of media in our stories. So we'll make a story out of Twitter reactions, or we'll make a story out of Vines, or, you know, Instagram posts, or anything like that. And we can include those. Obviously, you just embed those right in the story. Anything to keep people, I guess, interested, or anything. Well, it has to further the story, and it has to at least make sense in the context of the story, right? But you know, if you kind of put your reader's voice into the story in a natural way, that I think is a great way to keep people reading and keep people invested.
Delia, if I could just rephrase and kind of reframe and ask you, how is news being created to target the younger generation, or as we refer to in the headline of the panel title, the cordless generation? Do they see those changes? Do they write? Do you write differently to kind of reach that cordless generation?
So I would say when I was writing, this was much more a case in my time at New York Mag for both Daily Intel and Vulture. It's not so much writing for a particular generation as it is writing so that people will be maximum interested. I mean, you know, New York Mag's blogs do a really great job of this, but it's a lot of like sort of rephrasing, rethinking the story. If everyone is writing, you know, the one headline, what's the other part of that? You should maybe just try looking at it from a different perspective, especially because so many people now are just blind sharing. You know, they've done a lot of studies about how people will just like retweet without ever clicking on the link, or they'll share on Facebook without ever opening the article. And so you kind of really just want to get people to be interested. And obviously this only works for some stories. It doesn't work for every single story. But my personal belief is that you should frame your news story in such a way that if that is the case, if someone is only going to read your tweet or only going to see the information within a Facebook post, they still need to get something out of it, and it still needs to be interested. You know, obviously we all want people to click through and to read and to spend 5 and 10 minutes with that story, which is unheard of and it will never happen. But I think Jonah Peretti at BuzzFeed is of this belief that, like, you can't continue clickbaiting. That's not going to work. No one is going to retweet, you won't believe why this sloth is happy today. Like, no, that's stupid and it's dumb and it's embarrassing to you and it's embarrassing to your readers, and everybody deserves better. But yeah, so I think you just really want to make like the maximum impact with your article. And for me now at the Post, because I do a lot less writing, I look through our stories and I try to find whatever the most interesting, shareable, just really like standout nugget of information is, and that's what ends up going, on Twitter and on Facebook. And then you obviously want people to go back and read the whole piece, but even if that's all they get, they will at least have gotten something of value to their feeds.
Mm-hmm. And I know that there are challenges like with so many satirical publications now out there, and people quickly sharing content without really reading it. That there's a lot of fake stories that are going out there. And now we have actually a couple of questions from our Twitter viewers, and one of them is, and I'll maybe ask Max to get us started on this one. Do you find that conversational tone is difficult to come across with to some readers, and how do you kind of establish a tone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's something that you can, I guess, as a writer, jump right into. It's definitely developed over time, over seeing what works with your audience and seeing what you want to write. But I don't think it's off-putting. I think the opposite, actually, because, like we said, there are so many people writing the same headline, and so many people writing the exact same story that you kind of want to be different in any way that you can, just for your own soul, kind of too. But yeah, I think conversational tone, being brevity of any kind in a story, is always helpful if the story calls for it, if it's appropriate, and it definitely resonates. And part of it too is like if the people, like a reader who wouldn't like that, probably wouldn't like many things that I would write. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So developing a conversational tone, I think, just comes from experience as a writer, and experience, and definitely in reading what you enjoy and trying to emulate that to the best of your ability. And then it becomes more natural, and then eventually you just do it.
We have another question, and it gets back to kind of the reliability of stories and accuracy, and I mentioned before satirical sites, and I remember one morning on a Thanksgiving where I woke up and there was a story starting to trend on Facebook about someone passing away in a stampede at Walmart on Black Friday, I think it was, and yeah, it was Black Friday, and I realized that it was the same article from several years earlier, that because I was like, this sounds just like the tragedy from a few years ago, and it was, but people were just sharing the story, and it was a 3-year-old story. So with that being said, another question that came in was, when you do find the stories, I mean, how do you vet them? How do you know that these stories are reliable to run with? Travell?
Well, I think it's the general due diligence that you do as a reporter, and that's, you at the LA Times, you won't see somebody seeing a tweet and just, running with it to write a story. At the LA Times, you need to try to contact that person. You need to try to contact somebody who knows that person, somebody else in the situation. Like, you have to verify it, and 9 times out of 10, you need 2 to 3 people to verify it before you move forward with it. Now, that's the LA Times. At other publications that I have worked for before, it's a little different, and they have a different spin, and they have a different tone, and they're expected to do that. So similar to what Max was saying, I think, it's also dependent on who your audience is and what your audience expects of you. The LA Times audience doesn't expect us to do that, and so we don't do that.
Mm-hmm. Delia?
I think it's yeah, I think it's I mean Travell said it. It's
You know.
basic reporting 101. You wouldn't just take a source's inflammatory claims at face value and print them in the paper without checking and, you know, finding another source and citing your research, and you shouldn't do that with the internet either. I mean, I think it's really easy for some people to get caught up in like the technology and the perceived age gaps and, you know, whatever else it is that they want to like block themselves from good old-fashioned journalism, but that doesn't exist. You're still just reporting. You're just finding a different way to get in touch with your sources. And mostly that is here to make your job so much easier and so much better. But the fact that you actually have to check up on information has not changed.
Mhm.
So
I think I can add to that with something that I actually did today. So I was on kind of like my weird news beat is what we call just any story that's weird, you know. And there was a story from a site that is known to sometimes fabricate or kind of push news in an angle that makes it weirder than it actually is. And so, like we all said, like it is just reporting. So the story was that H&M had on their online store this shirt that was quoting Thomas Edison, and it spelled genius wrong, which is like that's just something people love to see when brands are stupid. So you think like this is going to share very well, but then I wasn't just going to run with that and take their screenshots, you know what I mean? So I went on H&M and I couldn't find it. And I was like, okay, so I don't know what exactly happened. Maybe H&M took it down. So we have various tools. We have the Wayback Machine or the Internet Archive. And then we looked on it and we did find that screenshot. So that is reporting. You know, it's not exactly like picking up the phone and calling H&M, which we did place in a request for comment from H&M. But yeah, it's still your standard reporting. It's just maybe looks a bit different from the outside. But it's using tools that you have to make sure that the news is legitimate.
And I did want to mention, we also, and I think a lot of newsrooms now use a service called Storyful, which is a company based out of Ireland, and full disclosure, News Corp owns them. That is like their whole job is to verify internet rumors, and they, you know, send a lot of emails every single day where they're like, hey, we have this video from this plane crash, we've verified it, it's legit, you can put it in your reporting, and here's where you credit the person who shot it, which is really helpful and great. And you know, I think some newsrooms decide to just do it on their own, and some newsrooms do use Storyful. We do a little bit of both. But yeah, I mean, you can always trust what's coming from them because they actually have reporters whose jobs it is to do what sort of Max did today.
With all those things being said, and with all that you have to do to verify sources and to be, you know, impeccable, how have deadlines changed? And I think I made reference to this earlier, but to just ask for more specific feedback on kind of how do your deadlines compare now to a few years ago? Are you expected to turn things around quicker?
Oh no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think so there are situations where I think we are expected to have a quick turnaround time on something. For example, I used to work Saturdays in the entertainment department, and the first Saturday where Bobby Christina went through all of her situations, and we didn't have anything up on our site, and so our manager of digital emails me and is like, you're the person on entertainment this weekend, you need to have something up within like 30 minutes. And it's like, oh, okay, now I have to, you're still doing your reporting, now you just got to do your reporting just a little bit faster. And so I don't, the deadlines definitely have changed in certain situations, but in others it's all very much just the same process as well. You might just not have, you know, time to sleep with your article because it has to go out.
I will say, for my very first reporting job out of school, I worked for a business magazine, and it was a monthly. So most of my articles, I had like 3 weeks to put them together and get sources and find art and talk to design, and that was all completely different from when I went to do reporting for New York Mag's blogs, which you pretty much have about an hour to put a piece together, and you find it, you source it, you write it, and then it's done, it's up. And yeah, in the case of something like Bobby Christina's accident, I don't know what it is exactly that we're calling it, but there are a lot of instances, especially during breaking news, where your deadline was 10 minutes ago. And you need to get something up as accurately but quickly as possible, and then you can always add to it. That's the beauty of the internet. Your story can be ongoing and upcoming and just in new information. But I think I remember it was the Friday night of Thanksgiving 2 years ago when Paul Walker died, and I just happened to be like half asleep on the couch when we got an email that was like, this happened, who is around, who can write it, we need it online immediately. And I think that's just a lot of how news works these days. You really kind of, there are instances where everyone is doing really good long form and really good features, and you have time with it, and it's beautiful, but there are also the instances where, like, when breaking news happens, you need it up like 5 minutes ago. And I think I'm constantly talking to our reporting staff who, is very used to the paper timeline of things, where they're like, yes, this is breaking and, we should get it right and fast, but we're not going to print for another 2 hours. And I am in the newsroom yelling, like, I need copy right now. I need a link. I need to send out a tweet now. So, we all have different priorities, but my priority is I want that tweet to be out as fast as possible. And I trust that your reporting is good, but I also would like to get there before other people.
Now, as we kind of start nearing the conclusion of our panel, I think I want us to touch on how these elements, and with the technological changes in mind, how that kind of impacts what you look for when each of you are working with PR professionals in terms of, cultivating stories. So, how has the emerging technology impacted the way that your interactions with PR professionals have changed?
I can't say that my interactions have really changed. I think, just like we are finding sources different ways, PR people are finding us different ways. I've had a lot of, relationships created with PR folks where they found me on Twitter or they found me on Instagram and they asked for my email, and then we get in touch. And I almost think that works a little bit better than...
I'm sorry to interrupt, but is that okay for people to do? Is that like an appropriate thing?
I think it might be a case-by-case basis, but I'm always okay with it because my accounts are public, and if you find me, that's great. That's why I'm there. I'm there for you to internet stalk me, basically. So I never mind. Maybe other people might, but I don't have that issue.
Max?
Yeah, the same thing. I'm reached out to on Twitter, on email. An interesting thing that I found, and again, I've been like a working journalist for 2 years, but because I'll make a connection through the first story with a PR professional, and then because they're working with different clients, like a year down the road, I'll get a completely different angle, a different even department kind of story from them. You know what I mean? I'll get something at first that happens to be a viral video, or something that 2 comedy people made in New York from a PR person, and then 6 months later, that same PR person is working with George Martin. You know what I mean? And I'll get in contact with him. So that's something interesting. On the side of Twitter, yeah, it's never inappropriate to reach out. Just do it. Yeah, send me a story however you can, except by somehow finding my phone number and calling me in the middle of the night. Don't do that.
Yeah, actually, I wanna, I wanna touch on the element. I mean, we're talking about the PR pros, and then we mentioned before those kind of deadlines of, an hour ago, or I wanted it last night. So, how do PR professionals help you reach those unreachable deadlines that are sometimes put forth? Are there ways that they help to facilitate and can help you meet those unreasonable expectations? Travell?
Well, I think the PR person journalist relationship in general is it's still based on the same thing, and it's if you as a PR person can develop and build a actual relationship with me besides just an email every time you want me to write about something, then that creates a better relationship for both of us. That way, if I am on deadline and you are representing the Kardashians and I need a quote from the Kardashians, I will be able to give you a call quickly and be able to say, listen, I got 10 minutes. I need you to give me a statement real quick. And then I think it helps both people when there's an actual relationship and you're not just, annoying me when it's time to write something for your client or for, whatever product that you all are promoting. So if you can build a relationship, even if it is through email, like, you can send me an email, say, hey, I've been following you, da 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 da. I do X, Y, and Z, just saying hi type of thing, and then follow up a week later if you have something for that you want me to cover. Don't just, I mean, sometimes obviously you're just going to send a blanket email and say, okay, we have this person who's promoting this thing. Would you like to talk to them? That's cute. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It really helps if there's an actual relationship there. You actually know the person, y'all have spoken before, and it's not you just, blind emailing somebody.
Mhm.
I don't know if that answered your question.
Oh, it
But,
did. Yes,
okay, good.
thank you. Do either of you also have any reaction to that?
Agreement. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. It helps to have a relationship because also it helps to be honest, you know what I mean? There are some times where if you don't know somebody, it's kind of awkward to be like, no, no, sorry again, no, this isn't right, no. But if you have a relationship with that person, you can kind of expand on why, or you can feel comfortable saying no in a different way. Um, yeah, it's always helpful to have that actual relationship where it's not just constantly connecting for work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I will say, in my experience, the joke was that journalism doesn't pay enough, so I was in it for the parties and swag. But events really help. Events kind of help people get their client's name out, their name out. You get invited to a thing, you go, you tweet about it. You're like, oh, that was a fun thing. Now I'm much more likely to know who this PR company is, to know who their client is. I mean, that's not to say that as soon as you go to a party, you immediately just start covering the crap out of whatever somebody wants you to cover, but events help. They give you FaceTime, and everyone's just a little bit happier with some canapes.
Now, in a couple of minutes, we're going to be concluding. And before we do that, I just want to again say how awesome all of you are and how great it is that you've been here as part of this panel. And so thank you. Before we officially conclude, I think it would be helpful for all of our audience that we're speaking to out there, those aspiring media professionals. I mean, for people following in your particular footsteps, I want to, from each of you, to know if you can give us any kind of wisdom on the way out, kind of tips for the future yous, the future journalists and media professionals who are coming in. And if you had one thing, each of you, to kind of advise and give a tip, what that would be.
My advice would be say what you want, which is it's the best way to go forward in your company. If you have an ability that you feel is not being utilized, tell your boss. They don't know that you have that. So yeah, say what you want to do. Won't always work out, but maybe they'll give you a shot to do it. And if you can prove that you can do it, that will lead you in a lot of new directions. That's what I did.
Great.
I think I would say it. I like to encourage people to stand in their uniqueness. You come to these organizations and these companies and they're hiring you for a reason, but then we get there and we become these, younger versions of the older people that are, looking over us. And that doesn't really help with our coverage. That doesn't help with, building relationships with the necessary people. It doesn't help with your career trajectory necessarily. Similar to what Max was saying, if you know what you want going into a particular company, a particular organization, and you are vocal about that, the worst they can say is no. And if they say no, go somewhere else that's going to accept you and is going to allow you to thrive in the ways in which you want to.
I completely agree with everything that Max and Travell have said. I think so many people these days, especially the generation coming out of college now, has all of the skills that people are looking for. I think they need to be, really sure of themselves in those skills, even though they lack experience. Obviously, you need to stay humble. But I was going to actually go back to what Travell said at the very beginning of our chat, which was you need to cast a wide net. You really never know where a really great opportunity is going to come. So just meet as many people as you can, and when the time comes, you should always take the meeting. A lot of wonderful things have happened because, people reached out, and instead of being like, no, that would never work out, I was like, oh, yeah, sure, I would love to hear what you have to say or how we might be able to work together. So I think the beautiful thing about, digital journalism today is that great work, great sources, great opportunities can kind of come from anywhere. So just you should keep a really open mind.
Delia, Max, and Travell, we can't thank you enough. I want to remind our audience that if we didn't touch on a question that you are hoping to hear, you should definitely tweet at our panelists to ask them, and so that you'll get some personal responses. On behalf of Zimmerman Edelson and the team of Zimterns, the wonderful interns, Lauren, Tara, Roberto, and Mike, who organized this panel, we want to thank you and the audience for being here, and we hope that this information will be helpful for the new professionals who are joining this ever-changing media landscape. So thank you very much to our panelists, to the Zimterns, and to you, the audience, and we wish you a great night.
Thanks.